10 men behind an armed standoff with police on I-95 in Wakefield were arraigned in a Malden courtroom today. Some of the men told a judge they're foreign nationals and belong to the Rise of the Moors. It's a Rhode Island-based paramilitary group which claims to abide by a fictitious 1700s treaty between the U.S. and Morocco. The conflict started when a state trooper stopped to check on two cars pulled over on 95 North overnight on Saturday and saw the group wearing military-style clothing and carrying long guns and pistols. Members of the group said they were headed up to Maine for, quote, training and had stopped to refuel. The standoff shut down parts of I-95 for hours until the group surrendered to police later that morning. Before they did, they went live on YouTube.
We're not anti-government. We're not anti-police. We're not sovereign citizens. We're not black identity extremists.
Despite these claims, law enforcement experts say the Rise of the Moors is one of several in the U.S. that adhere to a so-called Moorish sovereign citizens ideology, which, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, is the belief that they and other black Americans are not subject to U.S. laws or any other government authority. All 10 men and a 17-year-old are now facing various charges, including unlawful possession of a firearm and conspiracy to commit a crime. I'm joined now by the district attorney in charge of their prosecution, Middlesex County's Marian Ryan. District Attorney, thank you so much for your time. Did you ever hear of this group before this weekend?
I had heard of them, yes. I had not heard of them being in Massachusetts before this weekend.
And other than the Southern Poverty Law Center saying what I said in the introduction and the fact that they say, this again, the Southern Poverty Law Center, they are not a hate group. They're an anti-government group, whatever that distinction means. Do you know more about them now than I do, for example?
Probably. We've learned a lot about them in the last 48 hours.
Like what?
Yes.
Like what?
Well, I think where they have been seen, the numbers that they claim to have for membership, some of the beliefs that they have, and particularly some of their beliefs around this safe journey.
Like what? What are their beliefs around the safe journey, as you call it?
They believe that they are able to travel freely carrying weapons is a piece of what I understand.
Do you understand what they were training for in Maine? That was their goal. What are they training for?
We don't really know that yet.
So let's go back to the first of all, my understanding is there were some disruptions in the arraignment process, but I said at the top they were all arraigned. Do you even know the names of all 10 of the adults? Was that ultimately learned?
No, we still have a couple that are John Does.
And the charges, particularly the gun charges, could you be specific, District Attorney? What laws did they violate?
So they are each charged with 8 counts of possession of a firearm. They are charged with possession of ammunition. They're charged with the use of body armor while committing another crime. They're charged with possession of high-capacity magazines, with improper storage of a firearm in a vehicle while in the presence of a juvenile, and conspiracy to commit a crime.
I mean, they were, I guess it's a euphemism to say they were heavily armed. That's what you're describing, with some pretty serious weapons.
Right.
And is it illegal to carry, well, how can you legally carry weapons across state lines, legally?
You have to legally possess the gun in the place you're leaving. You have to be equipped to legally possess the gun in the place you're going. And you have to travel with the gun unloaded in a locked container. So it can't be accessible in the passenger part of the vehicle.
You know, I have to say, on this program and on our radio show, we've occasionally, more than occasionally, been critical of some members of the state police for this overtime thing and losing files. Mm-hmm. I have to say, as a layperson, though, the fact that this thing ended peacefully like it did is really a tribute, at least it seems to me, to a measured response to a potentially incendiary situation by the state cops, no?
Jim, we were at the precipice of tragedy here. If people remember, on Saturday night, it was pouring rain.
Yeah.
It was slightly after 1 o'clock in the morning. The trooper who initially responded has only been on the force a couple of years. Mm-hmm. He did what he is trained to do. He pulled up behind what appeared to be the disabled vehicles and he walked up the passenger side to keep himself safe in by the guardrail. As he was making that walk, and he has a body camera so we can see this, there are suddenly 3 individuals who appear in camouflage clothing, as we've seen, masks, body armor, 2 of them carrying long guns. The fact that he responded in the very, very measured way that he did is a great testament. And the officers who responded afterwards continued to really respond in a respectful and measured way. It goes to the importance of de-escalation training. Just last week, we were training officers on de-escalation techniques. This really should become a textbook example of how to handle a very dangerous and a very stressful situation.
One of the things that's really concerning to me, and I assume to you, not just as a district attorney, but as a citizen of the Commonwealth, this is just a by chance situation. Had they not stopped on the shoulder of the road and this trooper gone over to try to be of assistance to them, they would have crossed through Massachusetts as heavily armed as they were, and we never would have known about it. So is there any reason to not think that they've done this over and over and over again and only this one time encountered law enforcement?
Obviously, we're at the early stages of this investigation, but I think you're right. I think it's clear that from statements made in court today, this had been in the planning for a while. It's reasonable to assume there'd been other travel in this fashion, yes. And that's very, very concerning.
The guy who was their leader went out of his way to say what they're not. They're not this, they're not anti-law enforcement, not violent. Is there any evidence at all that you have that there was potential for violence there? I mean, it almost sounds like a ridiculous question considering how heavily armed they were. But was there any evidence that their intent was to be violent at any stage of this encounter?
We're very early in this investigation, but obviously, as you say, they were heavily armed. There were thousands of rounds of ammunition in that van. There were night goggles, there were helmets, all kinds of equipment. It is certainly reasonable to assume that that poses a danger.
So what do you say to residents of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, New Hampshire, in between, who were worried that there are organizations like this right around the corner, crossing by their residences, not in some faraway place in the South or the Midwest, but right in our midst? What do you say to them?
Well, I think this example on Saturday morning really highlights the fact that these things can happen when you least expect them. It is important that that we invest the money in having law enforcement that is trained to respond to that. That trooper clearly never expected to see this, that they're trained in those de-escalation techniques, and that we have law enforcement that communicate well with each other. So we know, as we've heard a little bit in this investigation, the kind of cooperation that's been going on between Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Maine around this incident.
Last question, Marian Ryan. Did these guys have records before this?
Some of them were known to the police, yes.
Some of them were. Marian Ryan, thanks for your time. Please keep us apprised of what's going on. Thank you.
I will. Thanks for having me. Take care.